Well, welcome everybody to our third virtual session. Um, Very exciting night tonight. Please pop in the chat right now. Send a message. Where you guys tuning in from? Love to see how far our reach is getting. So please, yeah, take advantage of the chat real quick. But yeah, I just want to welcome everybody to our third virtual session tonight. We had an awesome night. A couple things before we get started. With our virtual sessions, we do have some guidelines, some etiquette that we do like to follow. And we do want to give a shout out to Zach, the guy behind the scenes who is putting all these slides together. So thank you, Zach. So for our virtual session, some etiquette, video and presence, please, be present, engaged. We encourage having your video on, to build community and connection. If you do need to step away, please, put the black screen up, maybe a coffee emoji, something to let us know that you're, away, something appropriate. Audio, try to be on mute when you're not speaking. This helps minimize any background noise and distractions. Use headphones if possible. Obviously, you get a little better audio quality from that. Take advantage of the chat tonight. Drop questions, comments, or insights. Please, just be respectful and relevant. Raise your hand, use the emoji, if you'd like to speak. But yes, we are going to try to get you guys engaged, via the chat quite a bit tonight. So just keep that in mind, or be mindful of it. Participation, one mic, one voice. Avoid talking over others. Let each person finish before responding. Be respectful, maintain a tone of kindness, and please try to focus. Minimize multitasking. We obviously love your full attention when possible, especially tonight, given all the information that our guest has to offer. Feel free to take notes, keep track of what resonates with you, and yeah, there definitely will be opportunities to reflect and follow up. My name is Braden Verge. I'm a member of First Push, and First Push is a 501c nonprofit based out of New Hampshire. We strive to improve wellness by creating and activating supporting inclusive programs that provide opportunities for school-age children to develop leadership, grit, and resilience. Our flagship program is the Get On Board program. We have led over 400 programs and we'll have taught over 100,000 students how to skateboard by the end of 2025. Our impact, if you take a look at the map, back in 2021, basically based in New England, and now 2025, we are spreading all across the US. The Get On Board program launched in 2010 at a local event in South Berwick, Maine, and it quickly adopted into an after-school program. Get On Board has grown to become a full-blown student-centered program offering gear and training to schools across the country. We do have some upcoming events. A couple virtual sessions. December 8th will be a holiday throwdown. Still working on the name. But it'll just be a nice little get-together gathering, open session type of thing. January 12th, we will be featuring our Get On Board Teachers of the Year from the past. And February 9th will also be an open session, thinking kind of like an iHeart skateboarding type of deal. We do have our gear grant opening. Application is open. Please feel free to click the QR code or visit our website, www.firstpush.org/grant. And if you do want to take a look at those guidelines, you can go to www.firstpush.org/grant-guidelines. Tonight, we are featuring Bill, Dr. Skateboard Robertson. All right, really excited about this. Dr. Bill Robertson, a professor in the teacher education department at the University of Texas, El Paso, also go by Dr. Skateboard. Bill has spent decades merging skateboarding, STEM, and education in ways that inspire students and educators alike. We'll be exploring his journey, how skateboarding intersects with STEM learning, and how his experiences can transform classrooms and programs everywhere. So without further ado, welcome, Bill. Love to start you off with, basically our one word. I don't know if you got that or able to complete it, but we sent you
I
like a
did.
sign. Awesome. What is your one word to describe skateboarding? And if everyone else wants to join in, feel free to put it in the chat. One word that best describes that describes skateboarding to you.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you, Braden, and thank you, Bo and Zach for working with me and inviting me here tonight. It's really an honor. Very impressed with not only the program you've got going on, but the growth have in this approach, taking skateboarding into schools. And appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about me and my journey as well. There are a lot of words you could choose in terms of things about skateboarding, and I think many things for me come to mind, whether it's creativity, whether it's self-discipline, practice, setting goals. But the word I came up with, and let's see if I can get it. And can you see that?
Think we can, yeah. Yeah, it's coming in. Yep.
Persist. So
I like that.
because I can skateboard, I can persist. And I think the reason I put that is, and it's one of the things that's really helped me too, and things I do outside of skateboarding as well. But skateboarding's always been a thing that you have to work really hard at it to get good, and you have a lot of trials and tribulations. You fall down a lot. But if you persist, if you stay at it, you find a groove in it, and then it leans into mastery. And so mastering skateboarding requires great persistence, and then I think that overlaps into the things I'd like to do in education. I mean, even I tell people when you're pursuing advanced degrees in college, everyone's smart, but it's the people who are tenacious and persistent that really accomplish those kinds of goals. So for me, persist is kind of I think a trademark, especially for someone who's been skateboarding as long as I have too.
Awesome. I love it. No, that's a great word. Awesome word. Yeah, so let's get right into this. So love to hear about your story, from your first skateboard, to becoming a professional skater and then, becoming Dr. Skateboard.
Sure, thank you. So well, these are a couple of pictures from so the one on the beginning one is me in a middle school. So the year's 1976, just to give you some context. So I was 13 years old. I was a middle school student, and this is me skating at my middle school. And I just got into skateboarding. It was kind of an accident. I was a kid who played lots of different sports. I was a wrestler. I played football. I played baseball, and then a friend of mine said, "Hey, let's go get skateboards." And I said, "Why do we? I don't want to skateboard, And so we went and bought skateboards because it was like spring break, and we all decided to try it in our neighborhood, and it was fun. We started doing it. I had learned how to surf and water ski the few years before, so probably those things. It was fun, and then that summer I got a board. So I had my first one was like a plastic board. Then I got a nice board at the time from a surf shop in California, and started skating, and then got into contests. And so by being in contests when I was about 13 years old, and I did well, which so it was a kind of a sport you could do on your own, but it was really hot back then. There was a lot of momentum going on with skateboarding and a lot of contests. So I started skating and competing in contests and got different sponsors. The middle one, I rode for a company out of California called Huntington Beach called Powerflex back in the day, and then so I rode for them and traveled all over. And I went up and down the East Coast. I didn't make it all the way to Maine or New Hampshire, but pretty close, and like Philly and other places and throughout New York and all the way down into Florida and then out to California. So that was kind of a eye-opening experience for a 14, 15-year-old kid. And then I was going, and my parents were real supportive. I kept doing it, turned pro, and had a model for walker skateboards out of Florida, and then competed, for a number of years. And then skateboarding died, I mean, skateboarding kind of died for a while, but I kept skating, I just enjoyed it, something I was good at. I enjoyed it with friends, and then probably around the time the X Games were going on, I got hooked up with Got Milk and did 5 years of things with Got Milk on this gravity tour and went all over festivals, half times. I've done, all sorts of NBA stuff, skate parks, music festivals. So all over the place doing stuff. And then I started doing work in schools along the way because demos were always a big part of what we did, showing skateboarding. So, I kept at it, even to today. So you can see there's a straight line from my beginning to today. I skated, just this weekend, and it's still something I enjoy doing. And it is, it defines me. I'm a skateboarder. It's like how I see the world. It informs me on what I do, and now it's like I liken it. Just one last thing I would say is I really liken my skateboarding to like being a musician in some ways. Like I play this instrument, and I can play it, well and in a lot of different ways. The other thing is I've been in bands along the way. Sometimes I've been the lead singer, other times I've been the bass player, and sometimes I've been the head roadie. But I've been into it the whole time, so it's helped me to travel from I've skateboarded throughout South America and in Antarctica, on a ship, throughout Canada, all over the place, Jamaica. So skateboarding's really helped me to see the world, and that started, as a young guy, which was cool to still be able to do it today.
That's awesome. I mean, I just can't imagine. It's been like, then just those experiences and how it's like you said, it grew, got hot, stopped, and then like has, it is slow, it's coming back. And then I feel like it's, getting even bigger now. And we're noticing or seem to be noticing a lot more kids interested in like picking it up again. Whether that's COVID, because we couldn't do anything or what, but there seems to be a lot of interest. Um, I would like to get into, your doctorate. You go from being, a skateboarder, and, how did you, you know, merge skateboarding with education? Did you always want to be a teacher or an educator? And eventually, earn that, doctorate.
No, it's a great question. So, the idea was when I was a kid, and having all these experiences as a young person. So by the time I was 16, 17, I mean, I did want to graduate from high school. And I went to a public high school, same as my brothers and my sister. So I wanted to be like, like them and go to, that. And then I'd made a goal to go to college, and nobody in my family went straight to college out of high school. So I, wanted to do that, and went to college, and kept skating and stuff even during the periods where it was down. Became a teacher, so I was a middle school and a high school science teacher. So I enjoyed doing that. I always thought if I was a teacher, I would have summers off, which, anybody who's a teacher in the crowd knows that's a joke because you end up working all summer anyway, doing different stuff. But I loved that, and enjoyed my time there. Got my master's, which was something that a lot of teachers were doing. And then at one point, I decided, hey, maybe I'll go after my doctorate. And I literally knew no one with a PhD, and so because I remember talking to friends, skateboarding friends, and I'd be like, hey, I'm gonna go get my doctorate and get my PhD, and they'd go, dude, I don't know anybody with a PhD, and I was like, me neither, So I kind of set that as a goal, and then, I, good mentors, good people encouraging me, and, I ended up going after and getting my PhD. But what was interesting to me is along the way, at one point, really, I wasn't that great of a student. I wasn't really super motivated in school because I was doing all sorts of things. I was seeing the world. I was, traveling, and people then challenged me to say, hey, you're good on that skateboard. If you put your energy into school, I think you could do really well. And I took that to heart, because I didn't see them as separated. And so, and then many of the things I did I was way more successful in skateboarding than I was in education. I just have to kind of put that out there. But the things that made me successful in skateboarding, like setting goals, being creative, being persistent, being disciplined, being creative, all those things uh, overlapped into my pursuits in education. And I think once I kind of internalized that, I was driven to do well and enjoyed the process of learning and felt, and then I could achieve. And that was kind of a cool thing to learn. So deep down, I think it was this idea that, skateboarding in some ways fueled me in this pathway and gave me success that I could lean on and then do into my education. And in so many ways, that's what Dr. Skateboard's all about. I mean, Dr. Skateboard is as a name or a brand or whatever you want to call it. It's really an oxymoron. I mean, Dr. Skateboard is like like jumbo shrimp or military intelligence. Like whatever the jokes are. But the idea these are two terms that don't belong together in some ways. And so they seem diametrically opposed. Doctor being something of established and respect, and skateboarding is sort of a fringe activity that's done in the back alleys of America, and why I put them together was I wanted young people who liked skateboarding like me, to be attracted to skateboarding and perhaps they could see themselves as a doctor. They might pursue their education. And then for adults, the challenge was, hey, you see me as a doctor, but you got to realize it comes with the skateboard. So the message there is don't marginalize young people who are good at these things just because it's different, because they may be a doctor one day. So it had this dual meaning, and I liked that. And so, I kind of adopted that early on, bought the website and all of that stuff, and and then became that as sort of my brand and with my mission as well.
That's awesome. Was there like a particular moment where you were kind of like, all right, skateboarding could be used as like a powerful tool, for learning?
I mean, I was doing demos in schools and lots of different things like that. But really, when I was a middle school teacher, so I was a high school teacher first, and then I became a middle school teacher. And when I was a high school teacher, I could really relate to kids. I was practically like one of them, and so
Right.
I could be somewhat like I could use my sense of humor. I could be sarcastic. I could do all these things, and I could get by with doing that. And then when I shifted to the middle school, um, you had to be a much better teacher. You had to be a much more caring individual. And so because, people developmentally were all over the place. And if you could be like, oh, I'll just say something kind of funny and it would make a kid cry. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's not that's not good, So I had to get serious about the pedagogy about how to teach, and so I started to really get involved with it. And then I was teaching at the middle school, and I was doing the physical science lessons, and they weren't into it at all. Like I was doing these standard kind of experiments, and they were just bored. And the discipline sometimes of trying to manage your classroom as a young teacher is a challenge, right? And so I just decided one day, you know what, I can teach, force and motion if I bring in my skateboard. And I'm an all-around skateboarder, but I was a professional freestyle skateboarder. So I can ride, on a basketball court and do a ton of stuff on the flatland. And so I knew some tricks, that I could do that demonstrated these principles. And so I brought the whole class out and went onto the basketball court and basically did a demo and talked through it with them. And the tone in my class changed like that, and I thought, hey, I'm onto something here. Um, I got it. It was difficult because the schools didn't necessarily want me to do that, but they could see how the students were engaged, and like you, I started clubs in the school and just kept at it. And then I think over time I started to really see how skateboarding could be used as a mechanism to teach concepts in science, mathematics, now engineering, and technology. So all of STEM really, but it sort of grew from that moment as a middle school teacher to today.
And like with your work, I mean, it's just showing that skateboarding is, not just a sport. It is a lens for learning and creativity. So definitely, since you brought it up, love to like, explore how, STEM, and skateboarding, you know, connect. Obviously, with your action science, Zach and I were able to watch a lot of the videos and stuff. So we'd love to, hear more about that and how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of put it under this banner of Dr. Skateboard, and I was doing like the science of skateboarding is kind of how I approached it. And excuse me, being a kind of a performer, basically like a street performer, I was able to, kind of walk people through and actually do like, if you will, a teaching, if you will, lecture while I'm skating. So I could demonstrate things like, like even let's say a trick like a manual, a nose manual, and talking about how using your balance and dealing with forces or using an ollie and talking about gravity lift, thrust and drag is kind of things that you do in there. Another one is you do a trick like spacewalk or even pushing. You're using action reaction, one of Newton's fundamental laws of motion, and uh, and so these were concepts that I could, work through and talk about um, things like spinning or doing things where you're flipping the board. You're dealing with centrifugal forces, centripetal forces, moment of inertia. And so all those things I think started to, and like I said, it was more like a dialogue I would have while doing a demo. And then about, I don't know, it was when I came here to UTEP. I'm at the University of Texas at El Paso, and I met some people at a school district, and I had this idea about, bringing, video into uh, schools about this video and classroom activities. And the phrase I thought of was action science. And you see sort of the banner there and behind me, because we used not only skateboarding, but BMX was another, a good crew of BMX riders. And we were, and that's what our demo teams were too. Anyway, we started calling it action science and then, really try to figure out, you know, what fit in there that we could do. And so we, used the physical science concepts of motion, uh, forces, Newton's laws of motions, and simple machines as sort of the framework and built a curriculum product that was on a CD that had 4 films and, 20 classroom activities and did professional development and did that with a school district here, the largest school district in El Paso. And then it was distributed to all the schools. Um, I was lucky because the school district didn't want it. They built this thing with me and then they gave it to me. And so I took it and then I produced it and started sharing it. So I gave it to all the school districts here in El Paso. And then I did, as I was traveling around, I'd share it with school districts. I'm bilingual, so I could change it into Ciencia de Acción, and then I was all over Mexico and South America. I spent 6 months in Chile. I was in Argentina, Uruguay. And then more recently, I was across Canada too, and so it had good reach, uh, and then, over time, you're like figure out the mathematics of how this could be done and, how, all the engineering that goes into not only skateboards, but parks and different ramps and the things we do. And then, of course, the technology of, even what the boards are made of and how they're made and the urethane wheels and bearings. And so, we just started to really, bring all that together and use it as a banner for under action science. And today, I mean, I think what I'm really trying to do now is, I've made the videos, we made a product. We didn't really sell it. We sort of provided it. And then I put them all free on YouTube now. I've made graphic novels, so comic books that, are in English and Spanish, and we've done video games. So, I'm a curriculum developer is really what I am as a professor. That's one of the things I do. And so this has given me a vehicle. I would say, if I didn't have good support at the university, it would have been harder because usually something like this is not really well embraced in academia. You've got to really have some people who are a little more forward thinking. And I had people, and that's one of the cool things about being in West Texas is you're way out on the edge of stuff. And they were seeing results, so they were like, "Hey, you keep at it," and they supported me. And if you look at the picture where I'm doing the nose manual in sort of an arena, that's in the basketball arena at UTEP. It's called the Don Haskins Center. Don Haskins was a great coach here. They won the national championship in 1966. There's a great movie called Glory Road about him and that team. But anyway, the basketball arena is there. It holds 12,000 people, and we did a demo in there with in a big event, and we had 8,000 middle school students there at this demo, and the school put it on. It wasn't easy for me to bring athletes in, BMX, skateboarders, and stuff onto the floor. But one thing I would say that was kind of funny because I was back there backstage with all the athletes, and we were getting ready to like huddle up, and we were getting ready to go out. And it was a big crowd, I mean, you think about it, like, I mean, I go out and skate, and there's like 10 people, and you go out and there's 8,000. That's a whole different vibe, about what you're going to do. So we're all a little nervous, but and anxious, we're all circled up, and I was like, okay, everybody, today's either going to be my best day at UTEP or my last day at UTEP, because the basketball floor is like sacred ground, And anyway, it was a good day. It kept on. So the university has been supportive. The community's been embracing because I think they realize that it's authentic, it's real skateboarding and real learning. And I think the other thing is there's been a lot of good that's come out of it. And so you can't hide the results when kids get turned on by it and do great things on their own. And I just see myself as sort of a catalyst for trying to accelerate the education and learning process in young people.
Man, I can't imagine. I mean, 800 students is the most that I've had, and field day was a big deal, but 8,000 people watching. Yeah, I got like what are you talking about? Like, I got like chills going right now. I'm like, I don't know.
But the other thing is 800 is a lot, 300 is a
Right.
lot. A classroom 25 is a lot, because I mean it's all about making those connections with individuals. So, I mean, I think that's why whether it's one or a big number, because those were few and far between, but at the same time, I think whenever you can, draw people to this and connect with them, that's really what's important.
Exactly. And it's funny. What I want to get to next is you use a word, and I use it all the time, and that's edutainment. For me, I call it physical edutainment, as a PE teacher. Like, it's not physical education, it's physical edutainment because I'm here, entertain you, make it fun, make it relevant, and like you just said, build on those connections. So I'd love to hear, or we'd all love to hear like what edutainment means, to you.
So the idea, many years ago, I was working with a friend, and we were, developing a pilot for a television show, and it was for a kids show, and we were using the idea of educational entertainment, edutainment, and we started doing it the same way you just talked about, Braden. That we would have something that was entertaining, but it had an educational component to it. And so we started using that. But then the other part of it is I became an academic, and edutainment was actually a field of study. This was an area that people were doing work in, not so much in STEM, really, but the ideas of communication and other areas they were doing that in. And so this was a place where, I felt like I could exist not only as a skateboarder and a curriculum developer, but also as a professor, as someone who has to put out academic capital. I mean, I'm judged on the articles I can produce and the grants I can win, and you do try to find a community in which you can be a part of. The other part is, it had a great history, just like I was saying with things like, PBS and, children's television that, goes at the roots of what edutainment is. And a lot of edutainment can be traced through different vehicles like television, video, different types of creative ways of communicating that. And so I just felt like this really fell into that. I did have the good fortune of working on a children's television show here in El Paso for 2 years called Blast Beyond. We did 180 episodes over 2 years. I wasn't on all the episodes, but I was part of the creative team that worked on it. I think I was the guest who was on the most. I did like, I think, you know, I don't know, 20 visits as Dr. Skateboard and like 10 as Professor Robertson. And, but it was for kids ages, 3 to 8, and they would come on as a group and we would film it. And what was interesting about that, even as a vehicle, is, I work at UTEP and kids, I've been here a while, and kids would come up and they would say, you know, you were on it, Blast Beyond, and I was like, that's where I saw skateboarding on TV, and really got into this idea of being, doing something in STEM, and that just is like, mind blowing to me. But just the idea of the reach of it, I think, is the other thing. The last thing I would say is sometimes in terms of academic capital, you write an article and you publish it in a journal, and I don't know, 10 people read it, and and it counts, right? It counts for you. But we produced films and things that have gone on to, other places, whether it's YouTube or Vimeo or whatever, and they've had hundreds of thousands of visits. And so the reach in edutainment is just much greater. And then, as I said, it translates well into other languages. So being able to take this and do it in other countries, that are Spanish speaking countries, has been a way to express it as well. And so with video, with multimedia, social media, different parts of technology, but always making it authentic and real in terms of both the skateboarding and the content.
Love explain that. Edutainment is explanation is a lot bigger than what I had. No,
I
that's
told you I was
awesome.
an academic,
I know. That's awesome. Speaking of like Spain, when did you get your Spanish degree? Didn't you had a degree in Spanish, correct?
I did. It was funny because I was like probably like a lot of people. I took Spanish class in high school, and then didn't use it too much. I lived in at one point I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and could use my Spanish, but I wasn't real super disciplined in it. Then when I moved here to El Paso, and El Paso is right on the border of Juarez, and so it's right on the border of Mexico. I mean, there's the Rio Grande, and then so there's Mexico on one side and the U.S. on the other. Um, and it's a very bilingual, bicultural community. And it was almost like if you lived here, English was the language of business, but Spanish was the language of like culture. And so if you really wanted to be a part of the community, you almost needed Spanish. And so I started taking classes at the community college because I knew I needed something a little more disciplined. And then I thought, I go to UTEP, I'll just take some classes there. And it was funny because I went to take some classes, and I said, hey, I would like to take a class. I'm a professor here. And they said, oh yeah, you can take a class. You got to enroll. And I was like, okay, I got to enroll. And they're like, yeah, And I said, well, okay. And so they made me apply to the university. And so I had to submit my transcripts and everything. And I got accepted, and I was classified as a senior because it was an undergraduate program. And then I was like, okay, this is on now, And so I started taking classes with different professors, and I would go into the class and say, I'm letting you know I'm taking this for a grade. I'm a professor, but treat me like a student. And people didn't have a problem with that. They taught me the content, and I had to go through it. And I completed 30 hours of Spanish, literature, basically, of learning to read, write, and speak in Spanish in so many ways. I mean, from my base of learning. And then what else was funny is, so El Paso has a large military base called Fort Bliss, and Fort Bliss has a long-standing commitment to Fort Bliss and the Army, and so a lot of ex-soldiers end up in UTEP. They go on the GI Bill, they've been a soldier, they retire, or maybe they've been in the military for a while and then they come to UTEP. Anyway, you see a lot of older students. So I was in these classes, and I don't think people really batted an eye. They didn't think of me like, oh, here's this professor coming in. They just saw me as an older guy, probably an ex-military maybe, who's, taking some classes. And it was funny because I had friends. I made friends, who were students because I was in the liberal arts and I'm in the College of Education. So, I had friends, I had study groups, I had different people I met, and the demographic of a student at UTEP is very different than your traditional, residential student. These are people whose age span, they have families, they have children, they have jobs, And so anyway, I was I was at the College of Education one day and I saw one of my friends and she came up to me and she started talking to me like, "Oh, you're in this class. How cool," and so I said, "Oh, it's so good to have you here and stuff." And then she sat down and I said, "Hold on a second." And I went to the front of the room and was like, "Welcome to my class." And she had no idea I was a professor, right? Like literally went like that. And it was funny because, that was so I spent, 4, 5 years, almost 5 years doing this to get that degree. And I was truly the undercover professor, which was and why I think that was kind of not only that I learned Spanish and, did things with it. I mean, it did help me go to Chile and certainly helped me with all the things I do in English and Spanish on the border. But the other thing that was really interesting about that is as as someone who was coming back to school and having to learn, it taught me a lot about second language learners, right? It taught me a lot about struggles, people who just know Spanish going to English. So it gave me, I think, a lot of empathy for the people the folks I live and work with here and the students coming in, because we have, I'd say 10% of the students at UTEP come from Mexico. So their primary language is Spanish. So there's lots of opportunities to continue to use it. It was really something that I set out as a goal. Even today, it was funny because I was talking to some guys, and the one guy came over and he said he was trying to explain to me what they were saying in Spanish, and then he just said, you speak Spanish, you know what they're saying. And so I think I've grown in that. But what it's been able to do for me, just as it started out as a goal of something to, if I stuck around here, that would be great. But it's become a skill, that you can use, and it allows me, I think, just to have more connection to more people and to, in many ways, embrace the cultural parts that I really enjoy.
Right. Right. And I mean, you're located like where you are. I mean, it's just that's awesome. Back into the action science because I got a little off topic. I was just curious, like I said, with earning your degree just in
Mhm.
Spanish, I think that's amazing. It's awesome. With your action science, with the educators, you talk about relevant education instruction. Can you kind of dive into that and what that means, what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean the piece for me a lot of times is, kids, at least the success I've tried to have, and I'm a teacher, so I'm not always successful at everything. But things I've learned to do is first to, make connections to individuals and give them a sense of community where they can try new things. and and to bring them into that by integrating their experiences and their gifts, if you will, what they're good at. And sometimes that's providing choice, making things a little more open-ended than probably you might, to allow for that creativity from that individual and to come into play. Why that is really important from an educational standpoint is if you can create this environment for learning, which is allows people, that kind of freedom, but also that kind of support. What it does is it challenges them to do two main things. And the first one is to go to areas of high risk. So when you're learning, right, like if you go to do something that's easy, or you're just memorizing it, or you're not really trying, you're not risking anything. It's like, if you really want to learn, you're going to have to kind of put yourself out there, and you're going to have to take a risk because you might be wrong. You have to do all these things. So it's risky. And that's like, for skateboarding, that's like, perfect, because it's like, risking is part of it, but at the same time, you've got to be able to make a risk. Because the second thing is you've got to be willing to go to areas of a high ambiguity. Like you don't know what's going to happen, right? And so you have to be comfortable with venturing into the unknown. So being risky and venturing into the unknown are qualities you want individuals to take, because that's where like learning occurs. I use examples a lot of time about, how we would learn something, and we might be able to learn how to change a tire or something like that. And you read a manual and you go through it, and you maybe change a tire at a driver's ed, in the parking lot. But the first time your tire blows, like it did for me, it's not in the parking lot at the driver's ed, with all the tools. It's on the freeway, and you've got to change the tire. And that's really the day you learn how to change a tire. So I'm not saying you have to put yourself in a difficult situation, but you have to have a place where people can apply their learning in ways that test them, that really stretch them. John Dewey said, you learning's the responsibility of the learner, and you learn by doing, which are real basics of constructivism. And I kind of see this idea of moving people to high risk and high ambiguity in a kind of a safe classroom environment, where learning occurs, puts the learning squarely on the learner, and then puts them in a situation where their experience will pay off in the learning as well.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, comfortable being uncomfortable. Like it's so true. That's where, those challenges, putting your skills to use, um, under those high pressure situations, um, really kind of shows like, all right, what have I learned in this setting? Um,
Yeah.
oh, that's awesome.
I
And
would say that, it doesn't always have to be. I think what it is too, like you're getting people to step out of their comfort zone, but at the same time, if you're allowing them to, integrate their interests, because they may not all, I might use skateboarding as an example, but other people are, use what their gifts are, what they're good at, whether it's music or what their interests are, here with, language, or just reading, writing, the different things they can do. And I'll give you an easy example. I was teaching a class, and I talking to a kid before and after class. He was a real cool kid, and I learned he played in a band, but then I also learned he played four instruments, and at one point I remember talking about like what he played and stuff, and then I just brought it up in class one day, like, well, if we were like, Jaime, he plays like, I mean, he plays bass in a band, but he plays four instruments. And I'm like, what are they, Jaime? And he told me what the instruments were. And I'm like, dude, you're your own band, and this big smile came across his face, and he was engaged in the class and saw himself in it. And then he was participating, and so that to me is like, that's just the kind of thing where, and then you allow him to say, hey, use your music in what we're doing, if it's relevant, because the idea is if somebody's good at something, like they know how hard it is to get good at that, and then they can translate it into something they're doing that they're learning anew. And that's really what, mastery learning is all about. And they always say that in language, if you learn one language, if you learn a second one, learning a third one's easy. Um, but the idea is that, people have opportunities. Yeah, and you wrote connection. I agree. That's the thing. People have to see themselves in what you're teaching, but in also what they're doing, or else what's the point?
Right. Right. As you look ahead, what are your hopes that, skateboarding or just, action science, um, really like all the things that you've created will have on students inside and outside the classroom? I mean, with action science, obviously with your book, it's for educators to take a look at. Highly recommend everyone, take a peek at when you go to Dr. Skateboard's website. Take a peek at the action science book. But like, what is your hope, for action science to have, on students all over, or educators, inside and outside the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, so I've, thought of this a lot, and as you get, so I was a performer. I guess I still am in some ways, but I was a competitor. I was a performer. I did these demos in schools. We shot video mainly because I couldn't get in enough schools, and the video took us further places. Then I since have become a comic book character, which, one of the things about being a comic book character is you can do anything now. So I think the big part is trying to find ways to keep the message going in ways that are interesting to people. And staying relevant and connected to the sport. Action science has really always been about authentic action. So real skateboarding, real BMX, real action sports, being involved, in that, and whether it's snowboarding or other types of sports, surfing, whatever. Um, so, and then, growing the cadre of people, which is really interesting. It's like, the network here, the network of teachers I've worked with, all the skateboarders and BMX riders that we've done demos, and, we have friends in different places who are kind of like satellite, action science performers, and have done these programs and have been trained up like you all do with First Push Syndicate, and so I've tried to be you know a joke like I'm a pedagogical evangelist. It's like I taking this thing and been doing it on the road, and now trying to do it in so many ways through the new mediums, and with a new group of people. But I think that's the goal is, and then I can't be also I don't want to hold it too close, because in some ways it's hopefully it's going to find its own way. So where I've seen people doing things that may be like, like, hey man, that's like my program, like there's a little turf maybe that I'm feeling. I've tried to really let go of that, to be like, what's better is, if it's enhancing the sports that I'm into and it's helping people learn, then I'm going to support them. And so I think that's helped me be a much larger network, but not have to be in charge of it, or be the one person doing it, or just saying this is all it is. In truth, action science was a team effort from the start, and so I have a core of, I don't know, 30 people who I've worked with for years and years, kind of on this stuff. And so my goal hopefully is it takes on a life of its own, and it's manifested in new ways. But that it maintains this realness to it. I think that's the thing that I've always tried to to accentuate. I've been involved in a lot of things in the sport, and I was in instructional videos and things like that. And I've had great success, and I've been ripped off too. And I think that, um, that those experiences have really helped me to this place. But the ways we can connect now, like this, or just with social media, and then, like I said, being able to distribute things in different languages and finding ways now with AI, this is another place I think it can, I don't
Mm.
have to speak Cantonese, I can translate stuff into that. And the ideas will go. I do know this about skateboarding. I've been all over the world with skateboarding, and as I mentioned, I've been, you know, up and down the Americas and across Europe and everywhere. But I was in this little town in Argentina, at the bottom of Argentina, called Ushuaia, Argentina, and it's literally at the bottom of Argentina. And from Ushuaia, people push off and they go out to Antarctica and they cross the Drake Passage and all this stuff. And it's literally it's called El Fin del Mundo, right? The end of the world. And so I'm down there and I've got my skateboard and some kid tells me there's a skate park there. And so I go over and sure enough, there's a skate park with ramps and everything there. And so I'm rolling around at the skate park and there's some kids there. And the kids they start freaking out because I'm skating. I mean, I actually skate. And and they go and get the good guys, right? They go into town and get all the guys who are the rippers and they bring them back to the park because it's their park, right? And they're not going to get like they want to, they want to represent in their park, and they were cool. They were cool kids, and we had an awesome session. But here I am, literally at the end of the world, and I just show up with my skateboard, and immediately I've got community, man. I got a brotherhood, a sisterhood of people, and language doesn't matter, age doesn't matter. What matters is we're out having a good time and skateboarding, and so I think that characterizes, the thing about skateboarding that I think separates it from a lot of other stuff is that, you go somewhere with your skateboard, the cops may look at you one way, but skaters will invite you in.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You have that inroad for skateboarding. It doesn't even really matter your ability.
No, not at
It just
all.
matters that you show up and are open to that. And so I think that's the thing that will carry this forward. And I'm just hopeful people will see how creative, how much critical thinking goes on in the minds of skateboarders when they're, scientists rolling around a park.
So true. Like the community, I mean, the skate community is so welcoming. I think, and I feel like people have like the wrong idea. Like it's like, oh, like the skate community, like it's just a clique, but it's not. It doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter how good you are. If you're rolling around, that's fine. Um, one thing I wanted to ask is like, if for what advice would you give other educators who are interested in bringing, action science or, skateboarding, into the classroom or, starting it as like a program? What would be, the advice that you would give?
Well, first off, I mean, one of the things I do really am impressed about what you all are doing with First Push is, you've got sort of a turnkey approach to it. You bring a lot of assets to and support professional development, equipment, mentors, a network. People could plug in right away into a network. So that's, I think, an impressive infrastructure, and I really have to applaud y'all on what you're doing. For me, a lot of times I think there's two audiences. One is, certainly students, people who want to learn, and then just seeing that, what their love of skateboarding can translate into their education, and that it can be used in ways that are, that will help them to learn. But I would say most of my work, my concentration, I'm in teacher education. I work with a lot of pre-service and in-service teachers. I consider myself one of them. And so a lot of the things I've tried to build are very pragmatic for teachers to use in the classroom. Not that they have to be skateboarders or ride a BMX bike, but to develop activities that hook people in through those pieces and give them good resources, but also allow them to do activities that use classroom materials like, you know, straws and popsicle sticks and, clay and rubber bands and different things that teachers can get their hands on, and then that are enhanced with whether it's graphic novels or video or different things like that. The other part is actually there's a methodology to this. There's a way of teaching. And so I mentioned sort of the constructivist method, the 5 E's of constructivism. So it's engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate, which is a framework for learning, that I think is also can be very helpful for teachers to not only internalize, but to use as a way of structuring their curriculum. So there is an underlying educational philosophy behind action science, that I think can help with professional development, for teachers. So those are probably the two ways I go about doing it. I think, again, sort of like Dr. Skateboard as an oxymoron. I think this, getting people interested in sort of the coolness of skateboarding, as a pathway to learning. But also, I really think that, my primary audience, and probably because I'm one of them, is pre-service and in-service teachers at the K-12 level, who are looking for things they can do to help students stay engaged, and learning, and then try to build products that they can use. So that's where the books come from and the other things. And always happy to help and work with teachers, who want to help students learn.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bill, sharing for those insights. Now we're going to open up the floor to the audience. If you guys want to ask some questions, feel free to drop in the chat or unmute yourself and you can ask directly. I did also put up in the chat too, Bill's website. Please check it out. You get connected to, not only just the website, but Instagram, YouTube channels, Facebook, Twitter, MySpace if it was still around.
Bill, how old were you when you like first started, like when you started the whole like teaching skateboarding as a like method for like learning? Like how old were you when you first started doing that idea?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tyler. So, I mean, so I was like, going through high school and college, and I wasn't really doing too much with that, other than, but the thing about skating is, you always are like teaching each other, you're always like doing stuff and sharing and the park. And then I think, when I was really teaching middle school, so I was probably like in my mid to late 20s, so I was really at that point trying to become a better teacher. And I'd probably been, I'd been skating for, I don't know, so at that point, probably 15 years. And I had been pro, for part of that time too. But that's when probably, I really started to. It was funny because I almost felt like I needed a real job, because I mean, I was just trying to be a pro skateboarder and, work in shops and work seasonally and stuff whenever I could. And then I thought being a teacher would be, a good fit. So that was probably about a time in my life where, I was married and, and so I ended up, kind of committing myself to that. But was fortunate to feel like I didn't ever abandon skateboarding. And that's what's been kind of cool is like it just came along for the ride, as I became a teacher.
Looks like we have Zachary Turan's got a question. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah. So I had a question. You mentioned earlier about like risk taking as an instructional strategy. That
Mhm.
was super interesting to me. And my question for you is, have you like yourself, because you said you're actively working at a university. Have you like researched any of that risk taking in education, or I guess at least seen like other research about that? Because that's super cool.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. It's been interesting because there is a large. So this idea of edutainment extends into academia, But then there's also, like I've learned, there's a large network of academic skateboarders who are doing different things. And so this idea of this of risk, as it's used in skateboarding and in learning, and ambiguity has shown up in a lot of literature. The other thing about it is, risk, like we think about it in terms of taking chances, like I don't know, maybe the first time you drop in on a vert ramp, or something like that. I mean, you're like, you could really mess yourself up, right? And so the idea of pads and helmet and different things like that. And I have a friend who's actually an MD. He lives in Utah who, has looked at sort of this idea of risk, and helmet safety as a way of doing this as well. So there's a lot of offshoots of it. In terms of education, this idea of learning, of risk and ambiguity, there's a huge amount of literature that falls under that, and a lot of it you can trace back to this Russian philosopher named Vygotsky, who talked about the zone of proximal learning. This idea that there's a place nearby where learning will occur, and that some of that is also where you can see yourself learning, but you have to leave the space you're in to get there. And that's sort of that risk, taking a risk to go to a new place, in an uncharted place. That's the ambiguity of it as well. Zone of proximal development is what it's called. So there is I'd say threads that go from way back, the early 1900s to today. But the context of it is often controlled in many ways around a classroom environment, and the more relevant or more recent literature also includes what I would call like informal learning spaces. So places that happen outside of the classroom, parks, museums, homeschooling, different things like that. But the strategies kind of remain the same. So yeah, it's a growing area, and just to let you know, Zach, we have a PhD program here at UTEP. So, we would welcome you to come and join us here, and
Totally.
I mean, it's not that far-fetched when you meet in a meeting like this and you find yourself on an academic journey. And that's true for everyone here. If there was something I could do to help you, to help your situation, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. That was an awesome answer. I'm currently doing some research at UNH, kind of working with First Push, and then also kind of special education, physical education. So I'm doing it through skateboarding, which has been super cool. But I'm just trying to like kind of build this research knowledge base. So that was super helpful. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, well, please reach out if there's something I could help you with. I can edit as well. So, if you have something you want to share, be happy to engage with you.
Of course, yeah, I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
All right. Like I said, feel free to fire away in the chat as well if you don't want to public speak.
Well, I have a question. This is Rick Kramer from Maine, and I love the idea of the confidence building. I teach the kids at school that I teach in. We're here to do dangerous things in a safe environment. So confidence is our most important thing we can build to, I guess you'd call it, defeat anxiety, depression, etc. And kids that are more confident are less afraid. That's just basically how it is. And I tell the kids we're here to break as many rules as possible for the school. We're going to jump off the top of the fixtures outside and do a parkour roll when we land. We're going to do anything we can to push their limits. So I'm trying to bring First Push in to my school, probably, hopefully, in the spring or of next fall, depending on how much we can get done. But I have to ask you a question. So when you started doing this in action-based learning, were you thinking totally STEM-based, or were you thinking, hey, we're going to bring it to physical education and have kids have an outlet to push their limits And I guess you call it raising the floor. If every kid can skateboard, it brings everybody to the same spot instead of looking at kids going saying, "Oh, that kid's skateboarding. I could never do that." I would love to have every kid in my school watch a skateboarder and go, "Look at that trick," and they can name a nollie or a ollie or a kickflip, and they're like, "Holy cow, he did that, and I can do it too." So I just wanted to hear what you thought.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rick, and I love the idea of we're gonna like raise the danger level and learning. I mean that's truly I embrace that as well as like getting people out of their comfort zone, and I like the way you characterize it as confidence. Is building that kind of confidence. I mean, truly, STEM is sort of my area. I started as a science teacher. I became a science educator. I became a science and technology educator, and I've become a STEM educator over time because of sort of the evolution of those topics even being conjoined in terms of funding opportunities for the National Science Foundation. But I think the other thing is we know that learning is an interdisciplinary process that cuts across all areas. So like you're mentioning physical fitness, certainly a lot of things that you can do with folks. I've done with kinesiology. We've done, school programs. Um, Certainly with people who produced, so people who are writers, filmers. Just sort of exploring, if you will, the interdisciplinary nature of this approach. But I guess the putting things in schools when I was doing, you know, when I was working in schools, we had clubs and things like that. But I didn't have if you will, a program like you're engaged with First Push that kind of could really set you up to kind of bring the mantra of skateboarding in. And in some ways, that's why I turned to informal learning spaces. So I was in parks a lot with Parks and Recs, a lot both sides of the border, museums. Done a lot of work with museums as well, both in that as well. But I think you're right. If you can see if you can try skateboarding, and kind of learn it as a skill, then you can really build on that because for a lot of people it's kind of dangerous. It's a dangerous activity, but if you can kind of have success in that and be able to cruise around on your board, you've got a lifetime of freedom. And then if you do it long enough, everything you look at in the world will look like something to skate. And that's when you become, if you will, converted into skateboarder for life.
Well, thank you for your answer.
Yeah, you bet. Keep on rolling and thank you for your work. God bless you in that.
It's just a heads up. Zach did just put in the chat, all of Bill's, sick resources on YouTube. Couple links there, so be sure to check them out, save them.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Hey, Bo. Good.
So,
Thank
all right,
you.
I'm going to ask you one trick that you never want to lose, that you're going to make sure you keep at all times. What's that one trick going to be?
Yeah, no, it's I've written about it, with like the idea of like, I can I think I can do a 360 shove it in my sleep, I can jump out of bed and roll and do one. But one trick I never want to lose. So I learned how to spin, like to do multiple 360s. Back in the day, that was a big part of the competitions, and it was always a skill that you could do, and I can still spin, quite a few of them. And I think if I and one of the things I like about it is you never see it. People never really see it, and so it's one that I think is as time goes on, it's unique in that regard. But it's also, I think, a cool trick that I just enjoy doing. So I think that's the one I hope to be able to spin until I can't walk anymore. Would be cool. The other thing about it too with spinning is if you use different kinds of wheels. So with really hard wheels, you can spin a lot. And if you do look at my stuff on my website, there's a video of me doing it on steel wheels.
Mm.
When I turned 50, I did 51 spins. So that it's just fun, and so that's a trick I think that I hope I can continue to do for the rest of my days.
Love it. Love it. We got to dig out that trick actually that you shared with us. What did you do? Did you do it? Was it a nollie shove it that you did? I can't remember. Something recently you sent a clip for us. So we'll make sure we'll be cutting, or Zach will be cutting this stuff up and sharing it.
Yeah, well, I'm public domain, so do whatever you want, Zach.
Sure. But I do want to, just so you know who's here, Bill, like Braden will follow up after, but like we've got like good legends in here and legends in the making.
Nice.
So Keegan Guizard, Keegan runs CSEF, which is the Collegiate Skateboard Education Foundation. They give scholarships to kids that are skateboarders going to college. Like, I think you've surpassed $100,000 for sure already, haven't you, Keegan?
Yeah, we're almost 300,000 now.
Yeah.
Bill, we had a phone call maybe 6 years ago or something, and it's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you for coming tonight and reconnecting too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for doing this. This is cool.
And then Zachary is from Idaho, but he's here in New England at the University of New Hampshire as a full scholarship student doing his master's in adaptive PE, which is, he's going to be a legend. Moving on. And then Rick Kramer is a legend in Maine schools, public schools, physical education. Every single person knows who he is. And it's always fun to listen to the stories, and him, like, he's the first teacher I ever met that like put parkour in the schools. And, he leads with like fun and action. And then Tyler Newcomb was our first extended learning opportunities student when he was in 8th grade. Now he's a junior in high school, and he's brought adaptive PE to his high school and his community to the point where he's going to be doing a unified skateboarding event this year at a school level. And I've never heard of it before. I'm quite sure it's going to be the first one ever. And he's exceptional. And, he's going to be doing his college tours coming up. And just super bright kid, loves skateboarding. And actually recently got a grant to buy equipment for his school district. So it's a combination of adaptive skateboard equipment and regular skateboard equipment. And then, there are other people that are registered that'll get this. But anyway, super proud of everybody that's here. Like, puts a smile on my face to see different people popping up. So I thank all of you. I'm going to hand it back to Braden and Zach, and I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
I just have to say, Keegan's stash is phenomenal.
Yeah,
I
that's
just
a serious
unmuted myself
stash,
because
you're
I
right.
actually had a question. But thanks. Thanks, Bo, for the shout out, and to Zach and Tyler and Rick as well. Super cool. But Bill, I did have a question for you. As someone that's kind of been in this game, so to speak, longer than me or most of us here, it's kind of niche. Is there a school that's done programming the best aside from UTEP that you've
Um,
seen that you can comment on? Is there some institution aside from your own that you would say does a damn good job with it, and why, I guess?
It's a great question because, the one thing that's been hard, I would say, is finding people who have the kind of commitment to do that. And even at UTEP, I mean, in some ways, I'm an anomaly. It's not like, my program exists and stuff like that, but every professor has their thing, but we've been able to center our work here as something that kind of works across both sides of the river, if you will. I have a good buddy, Adrian Lenardic, who's at Rice University. He's a geophysicist. He does a lot in the parks with sort of probes and sensors on people and doing a lot of like modeling through capturing the if you will the motion that goes on and modeling that as well. He's done some really cool things and built that. But the one I think that really impressed me more than anything was a school in Toronto, Canada, called the Oasis Skateboard Factory, and Craig Morrison was the guy who started it up there. He's since retired, but the schools continued, and I went up there mainly because I heard him speak, and then I was like, I paid my own way and went to Toronto and spent a week with them, because what they do is they do it from from building boards all the way down to the marketing, and then they have a skate park and all of this. They built the whole alternative student curriculum around this. And these were students who'd failed out of like every school, and this was their chance to, graduate. And Craig had something like a 98% graduation rate. So they were incredibly impressive. I think of all the places I've been, they taught me way more than I, offered them. And I went up there and just was like just blown away with that. So yeah, that's the one I know probably the best. And I saw you put it, Keegan,
Yeah.
in there. You obviously have heard of them.
I haven't. I just did a quick
Well,
search and that
yeah,
was
they
just
were there. I'm not sure who's running the thing. Craig retired, but he's a young guy. Like, I mean, he's not like, I mean, it's like, I think he had been teaching though for like 30 years, and now he's doing other stuff. But the Oasis Skateboard Factory was, and I wrote an article about it. Interesting. Zach, was another one. I wrote an article about, the work they did there, because it was, to me, a way of immersive learning, and it was completely centered around skateboarding, from idea to product to ability to everything. So there wasn't a subject that was done without skateboarding being involved. I hadn't seen that anywhere else.
that seems kind of like what they do at Briggeria in Malmo and like certain schools in Sweden that have made that sort of famous because it's all legit high school credits, right? Similar
Yeah.
concept.
And then they had that awesome like replication of Love Skate Park, out in
Yeah.
Paso as
Yeah.
well. So they have some legitimate street stuff, in a historical scene, if you will, as well. So I'm with you. Hey, the thing to do, is to like, hook up with them and go get a fellowship and go over there. That's the way I like to do it. So maybe we
Yeah.
can pull something together there. That'd be fun.
Yeah, Malmo in general is just super skate friendly. They're awesome. Get Gustav, who works over there. Good, does
Yep.
good stuff.
Nice.
They're the first city in the world to centralize tourism on skateboarding.
Malmo
Yep.
to have like designated tourism department staff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
I
it
think so.
like it is designated like we are marketing towards skaters to come here. But that school is amazing. Oasis is amazing. And then that ties in just like with Kendall Van Valkenburg, who's like one of our teachers who does project-based learning and has at-risk kids that went through a whole RFP process, and met with the designers to get a skate park built in their town. Like they got real world experience.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I've got to jump out, but I'll actually, maybe we can put it out in a link after this, because I found the article from Brian Glennie, who's a professor at Norwich University and as a skater. You guys would know something he was involved with if you've noticed the handicap spot stencil now has action to it. Brian was one of the people involved in making that happen, but he's a lifelong skater, and he recently did an article that's more of like a primer of skateboarding research. So there's everybody in there. I think it mentions Bill, Thomas Kemp, Neftali, Zoe Corwin, like all the people that have been writing, Adam Brown, that write about skateboarding. He's kind of started pulling it together in one other article. He's a philosopher, actually. And so,
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
shout
for
out
it's
that too.
yeah,
shout out
yeah, right there.
Skate Bylines is in
Yeah, right
the
there too.
chat right now. That's
Oh,
him and
cool.
Farron Golding.
Yeah, it's like Wicked something in the title. I can't remember what it was.
Huh,
Super interesting reading though, and
cool.
like, yeah, I love the fact that everybody we talk to, Wicked Smart is what it's called. Everybody we talk to is like super into it, and then you've got skaters who are also like incredibly bright. Like my favorite's Alexis Sablone. Like she's just amazing. You know, she used to come to Rye Airfield when she was working on her master's at MIT, and just kind of cruise in and do her thing, and it was awesome. All right,
Nice.
I've got to run. You guys keep going, but I've got to scoot. Awesome to see all you guys, and take care.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, absolutely. Good seeing you.
See ya. Nice seeing you too.
I'm the non-skater in the group, Heather from Montana, working at tribal colleges. And I just dropped in a chat geometry and construction. There's also an algebra 2 in automotive. So I worked on that curriculum years back. So that's kind of a math piece versus the science. But Bill, thank you for your time. I do have a question, but it's too long for today. But I'm wondering if we should really be using the terminology real world in any of our academia. Because if we are saying, well, what happens in the real world is not what's happening in the classroom, then we are still telling students that math and science are separate from what they see in school spaces and not. So that's what I love about the skateboarding community that you guys have so far is we're actually seeing how science can be taught, and it is real life skills, and we shouldn't be saying that, but I don't know what the workaround around that is, but that's a goal of mine, to have students see themselves as scientists and as mathematicians and as technology and as engineers in every day.
Yeah, the way I hear you, because that was always the thing about like using problem-based learning or something and to put it in a context of a real world in your classroom. But I think I've started to lean into the idea of authentic and relevant as really the kind of the two words that I use, just because it personalizes it and it implies there's not a separation from what you're doing into your life.
All right.
It's got to be getting on 9 o'clock back there, huh?
Yeah, it is.
I admire your,
No, I
I
mean,
admire your persistence, man. I'm going to go back to my word, You persist. If I can get it
I've,
on camera.
no, but today's conversation obviously really highlights how skateboarding, can be more than a sport. It's a platform, for creativity, confidence, and as you said a lot tonight, Bill, connection. So we thank you, for sharing. I feel like just part of your journey. I feel like we didn't even like get into like all of it, and inspiring, educators everywhere. Thank you to everybody who, joined us tonight for the session. We can't wait to see how skateboarding continues to transform learning, for students and educators alike. Some additional information. If you want to learn more about us, First Push, feel free to hit up our website, www.firstpush.org. You can learn about getting our Get On Board program into your community. You can reach out to us at learn@firstpush.org. Subscribe to our newsletter, scan that QR code. Our next virtual session is going to be December 8th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be an open session, where we can all get together, have some current Get On Board teachers talk about, what they're doing in class, share some new resources, and experiences and exchange ideas. You can scan that QR code now to register for that event. We're trying to, like I said, make this a monthly thing. This will be uploaded onto Spotify as well as our YouTube channel. Spotify, I believe it is the First Push podcast. So you can, hear all about it there and take a listen to our previous, guests and panels. Again, Bill, thank you so much for tonight. And thank you everyone for joining in. we'll be hanging out for just a little bit, but if you got to go, you got to go. And yeah, have a great night, everybody.
Yeah. And thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for welcoming into the group. And I look forward to staying connected. And it's nice to reconnect with some folks. Keegan, it's good to reconnect. And I look forward to seeing where we can go from here together.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Good to see you
All right.
again.
All right. Buenas noches, everybody. Good night.